Thanks everybody for attending today. We're going to be talking about lighting and interiors. So the title of our webinar is Master Lighting and Interiors in KeyShot. And to be a little bit more specific, KeyShot 6. We got a lot of feedback from the sign up form, and we set out to kind of address some of the common questions and concerns that people had. Everything from those little white spots that you see to kind of a thorough overview of the lighting. My name is Richard Fennell, so I'm going to be the one going through the webinar today. I'm the training manager at Luxion, makers of KeyShot, and I can see that a lot of you have found the questions box. So as we're working along, definitely type in your questions there, and they're going to be answered live. We've got a lot of Luxion employees who are watching that, and the way we're going to do it today is we're going to go through, and we'll have some time at the end for kind of Q&A. So let me go over here and we'll take a look at our topics, or kind of our agenda. So the first half of this webinar is going to be it's going to be kind of a presentation. So we'll go through some slides and talk about some of the topics overall, just how they work and best practices, things like that. And then we'll actually get into kind of a hands-on portion with the SketchUp model that we're going to be using. We'll talk about the setup there, as well as our misspelled KeyShot scene. Dang, now that I've seen it, can't unsee it. Just as a reminder, this will be recorded. Any assets that we use, like our SketchUp model and this KeyShot scene, are going to be available for download. So I'll show you where you can get that stuff later. The webinar is going to be recorded. It's going to be posted on our YouTube page, so you can always watch it there and type in questions. And just as a reminder, we're in November, so we're going to be having a Black Friday sale in a couple of weeks here. So definitely, if you're interested in upgrading or getting more licenses or anything like that, just have to throw that in there, because it's that time of year again. We're going to be doing some sort of Black Friday sale, so I had to throw that in there. Again, if you've got questions, just go ahead and type them in, and then once we go through everything as far as content goes, we'll have kind of an open Q&A, but hopefully we should be able to answer a lot of the questions that you guys have. So, another thing that comes up pretty frequently is we get asked what the computer specs are for our presenters. So just real quick here, I'm running a Mac Pro, that's the hardware, but I'm actually running Windows 10 on a parallel, so I'm using 12 of the available 16 cores, and I think it's limited to 8 gigs of RAM. That's just the software limitation on this. But yeah, so that's an idea of the specs that I've gotten, obviously running the latest version of KeyShot 6.2.105. So let's go ahead and get into some content. We get asked pretty frequently, is it possible to add lights in KeyShot? KeyShot's really known for being quick and fast, and a lot of that has to do with the environment lighting, or the HDRI lights. But in KeyShot, you can always add lights to your scene, and this is one thing to consider and keep in mind, is that lights are added as a material to some piece of geometry. So there has to be a part. So for example, here you can see that I've applied some lights onto those cubes. They were previously just kind of diffuse cubes. They came in with the default material, but we can apply light as a material to that part, and we'll get into all the different light types. But in the material library, you have a folder for lights, and you've got your different material types there. So yeah, you can definitely add lights to objects. You just have to have an object in your scene already. Where can physical lights be used? Let's run through a couple of different use cases for physical lights, or local lights as they're also referred to. For example, in this scene, this is a great model from Turbo Squid that was rendered in KeyShot in 6 using the interior mode. And this is what the scene actually looks like from the outside. We're using these invisible light planes to help out with the illumination. Because even if you have a really bright sunny day and you've got that light streaming in through these really big windows, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be enough light bouncing around in there. So in this scene, we use some physical lights, or those local lights, to add more light into the scene. And again, only those two lights, two big giant panels on the outside. So that's where we're using lights. in kind of product renderings. You know, here we've got our cool little flashlight just sitting there, and the light is actually a piece of geometry on the inside. We're using an area light, again, similar to that helicopter interior scene. We're using an area light to provide the light inside of our flashlight. So there's a reflector in there, there's a little lens, and then deep down in there, what should be an LED, we've just converted to an area light, and so that's actually providing light in the scene. Something like this is working with a combination of a few different light types, but you can see in this rendering, we've got some light coming from the lamp itself. There's some nice sharp shadows on the ground, and there's some cool light coming in from the left-hand side. So if I actually just back the camera out on this one, we've got a few different things that are happening here. We've got an area light over on the left-hand side. It's providing that nice, soft, cool light coming in from the left-hand side of our scene. There's an IES profile, so we'll talk about those, but one of our advanced light types, and it's actually providing the light, the really nice, sharp shadow that you see here. And then on the inside of that assembly is a point light. And that point light is casting. You can see the light that's visible on the tire there. So we've got 3 different physical lights in the scene, and they've got a specific job, and they're doing something, right? There's also, and you can't see it, but because this is rendered on a backplate instead of the environment being visible, but there's still environment lighting in this one. We used an image pin on this one just to give some more interesting reflections there. We're not going to focus as much on the H3i editor this time around. But yeah, so that's a breakdown of how this kind of image was composed. So let's go ahead and, one more. Almost forgot our emissive material. So here we go. If we take a look at this, we've got our TV, and it's got the nice sharp highlight on the glass, and it's got the image on it. And as you can see on the ground plane right here, it's actually casting some light. So another use case for our physical lights. And again, there's the breakdown. 2 pieces of materials. We actually have a quick tip on this. If you search YouTube or Google for KeyShot illuminated displays, there's a quick tip on how to set this up so that you get both the light coming out and the glass reflection, which is what a lot of people are looking for in their product kind of imagery. So yeah, those are some of the different use cases or scenarios where you would be using physical lights in your scene. Let's get into the different light types, because there are a few types of light within KeyShot. First, just kind of a general guideline. Whenever you use lights, and this is probably something you've run into if you've worked with lighting before, use lumens or lux instead of watts anytime you're using lights. Lumens measure visible light within KeyShot. As you can see here on the right-hand side, we've got 1600 lumens, which is about the equivalent of a 100-watt light bulb. On the left-hand side, same scene, exact same settings, other than the units. On the left-hand side, we're using 100 KeyShot watts to power that scene, and it is crazy bright. KeyShot watts are not measuring visible light. They're actually measuring kind of energy output with no resistance. So anytime you're using lights, try using lumens or lux, and we'll get into that in more detail as well. But those of you who have used lights before, and I'm assuming coming from the questions that we got, people type in, they use watts and then try 1 watt and then 0.1 watt and 0.02 watts. Don't use watts. Instead, just use lumens, because lumens are an actual light measurement. So for example, here with a KeyShot watt is approximately 6,800 lumens. So again, watts are measuring something called luminous, actually it should be radiant flux, but on the picture right there, you can see a flashlight that is almost 2000 lumen, and it's bright enough at nighttime to brighten it up almost like daytime. And that's with a fraction of the power of 100 KeyShot watts. So that's really one of my biggest takeaways for units. Make sure you just don't use the KeyShot watts. The reason we use lumen is because lumens is because that's an actual measurement for light output. And the nice thing is, anytime you buy a light bulb or a flashlight, it's going to tell you how many lumens that light is. So here you can see kind of a quick chart from lumennow.org, but that gives you a kind of breakdown of what you can expect from a traditional incandescent light bulb. So again, the watts in an incandescent light bulb, they determine the power or electrical rating, whereas all we care about in KeyShot is lumen. So look for those lumen measurements on your lights. Also, you've got lumens and you've got lux, and we'll dive into that in kind of the hands-on portion. Lux are lumens per square meter. So if you've got two lights that are different sizes, in this case, you can see up on the little shelf right there, here's an old beta image from early days of KeyShot 6. Those lights are different intensity, and that's because they were originally defined using lumens. And so we'll talk about lux and how you can get more consistent lighting using lux versus lumens. If this is all new to you, no big deal, but if you buy light bulbs or if you spec out any sort of light, you will probably be able to find the lumen value for that light. Takeaway is that from here on out, anybody who's talking about light hopefully is going to be using lumen instead of watts in their scenes. But yeah, so quick introduction to the units, but yeah. Let's go ahead and talk about the different light types. So we've got 3 advanced light types, and we're going to ignore emissive for now, but we've got our 3 main advanced lights, and those are going to be area lights, point lights, and IES profiles. So let's break those down a little bit and see where we can go from here. So our area light diffuse, this is going to be kind of our first basic light type. What it allows you to do is it takes any piece of geometry and it turns it into a light emitting material or shape. The light is going to be cast normal to each surface. So on this image, we have a cube, and that cube is radiating light out in essentially 6 directions. If you were to think of that cube as a series of 6 faces, the light's going to be shooting out in 6 directions. And you can actually kind of see it. Hopefully you can see it, but there's some little dark spots on the edges. And that's because there's no light shooting directly there. The light is kind of pointing out in 6 directions. So the area light will take whatever your geometry is, and then it will cast light. So if it's the shape of a sphere or a cube or a plane or a cylinder, then the light's going to be shining normal to all the surfaces on that piece of geometry. Cool thing about area lights, you can make them invisible, and we'll talk about that on the hands-on. And they do have nice soft shadows. So the area light diffuse is going to give you kind of nicely diffused light. It's not going to be sharp shadows. Examples of this being used in a scene we're going to be working on is something like this, where the only lights that are on are, you can see down on the bottom, we've got the hood light, we've got the light on the shelves, the backsplash, and then we kind of have this mood lighting set up on the ceiling. And we're using area lights for that. And there's no light coming from the environment at all. This is all rendered just using the physical lights. And so the light itself is going to be really soft and diffused. And there are certain scenarios, especially with these lights, that I think you're going to want that kind of result, or that's kind of subjective. But if you need soft lighting, use an area light. In cases where it's sharp, like right here, it's pretty much sharp just because the light is hitting the edge of the counter itself. So that makes sense. But yeah, so area light's going to give you that soft kind of diffuse light. Another setup where we're using area lights is right now we turned all the lights off inside the room, and what we're doing is we're actually blasting light into the room using these big soft panels outside the window. So again, we're not using the environmental lighting at all. We just have one big plane outside the window, and we will run through this in the hands-on. But we have that big blast of light coming in, and you can see that that's giving us really soft shadows everywhere. And these kind of quick renderings, just kind of explaining those lights being used. Here, let's talk about our kind of second light type. So we have our point light diffuse. So if you were to apply this material to a piece of geometry, your geometry is essentially going to disappear, and all you're going to get is one little point, and it's going to be shooting light out in all directions. So the point light is omnidirectional. It's like a little miniature sun. It's just shooting out. It, as you can see here, we have some areas of higher intensity where it's closer to the wall, and that's just because that light is since it's a single point, this area is slightly closer than our corners or farther down here, so it's casting the light, but it's definitely going to be brighter in certain areas relative to the geometry around it. But again, consistent light in all directions. The point light, one advantage you do have with it is that it's really fast. So point lights are a super efficient light type. So that's just kind of a good thing to know or keep in mind. Examples of where this was used, and here you can see it as we've got a bunch of lights, and they're all point lights. So no light coming from the environment itself. All the light here is coming from these point lights, and these have been dropped slightly below the housing. So there's a light housing, and that's chrome, and slightly below it is these point lights. And you can see here that we get these nice, really sharp, crisp shadows as compared to our area lights. But because it's, again, like a tiny little glowing sun, we see those areas of high intensity where it's next to a piece of geometry, which would be, again, only there in this particular scenario where the physical light itself is set somewhat below the lighting fixture. If that light was inside the fixture, then we wouldn't get that hotspot. But yeah, definitely different appearance from our area lights, but our point lights are going to give us those little kind of pinpricks of light shooting in all directions. Last advanced light type is a point light IES profile. So these are very different, and these are really cool. IES profiles are a pre-made light, and it's an international lighting standard. The difference with these is that the IES profiles are going to replace your existing geometry. Whatever you had, whether it was a cube or a sphere or something, there's going to be a profile that gets loaded in its place. It does make it invisible, so we don't actually see the light itself, and that little outline we can toggle on and off. But IES profiles are really cool because if you take a look at kind of our rendered scene over on the right-hand side, the IES profiles determine the intensity of the light, the kind of the direction of the light, the distribution, the fall off, right? So all that information is going to be baked into that light, and then we can move those and set them wherever we need to in our scene. They are also really fast, and they're going to be super accurate. They're going to give you some really, really interesting results. So again, same scene. We, instead of having point lights, we added in IES profiles instead of the point lights. And you can see here that even without caustics turned on or anything like that, we're getting these interesting light patterns on that kind of hood above the cooktop. And that's because we were using those IES profiles. So it's a more intelligent light, and it's directed straight down, and you can move those anywhere you need to in your scene. So those are IES lights there, and we'll again run through that. One thing to make note of is that you should have 60 plus lights in your KeyShot library. They are only installed when you run a full installer of 6.2, so make sure you run a full installer, not the update. But the folder for the modular lighting instruments, which we partnered with Modular Lighting Instruments for those IES profiles, you can bring those in. And they're you've got a ton of lights already in the library. Just make sure you've used the full installer to update to 6.2. But again, this is an international lighting standard. You can find all sorts of lights from different lighting manufacturers and suppliers, and just use those in your KeyShot scene. One thing that I also tend to do, and I'll try to make sure that I keep us on track as far as time goes, is that I kind of add placeholders as well. So this is a little bit of an aside, but if I zoomed way up into my scene, since the IES profiles, and you can see here, you can't actually see the light source, we just see the light that's cast. I tend to plan for that, and I'll put kind of placeholders in my scene. So for example, here, that little portion that you see will be flat white. I can change that to like a flat white, which is going to be the brightest thing in my scene, almost maybe too bright, but then that looks like a light source, and underneath it is actually where I'm sneakily loading in that IES profile. And again, we'll run through this in the hands-on, but it is worth mentioning just because it is a good way if you want to see those light sources. Then you can just model in a piece of geometry. You can also kind of layer lights, and I haven't messed with this too much, but it is a really interesting concept. I just actually tested this for the first time, and I was like, oh, that looks slick. I got two pieces of geometry. One was an IES profile, and then I put a little cube on top of it, and I made that cube emissive. And I used an occlusion texture, so one of our advanced textures, to give it the kind of darker edges. But with an emissive cube and a IES profile inside it, it gives me a really nice appearance. The IES light shines straight through the emissive cube, and the emissive cube isn't actually adding a whole lot of light to the scene itself. and we wouldn't really want to. But combining those is a great way to actually have that visible in the scene. So either flat or emissive placeholders are a nice way to add that extra little bit of realism. There might be some questions like, what about emissive material? You know, emissive has been there in KeyShot since the beginning. So if you're using the emissive material, it is great for some use cases like TFT displays, LEDs, small indicators. It is not intended to light scenes, and I'll show you examples of that rendered side by side with the others. But I generally don't use the emissive material as a light source. So when I talk about advanced lights, I'm not talking about the emissive material. And those of you who complain about the little white hotspots, or it's not a complaint, it's a legit concern. But if you've got little white hotspots, don't use the emissive material. It is great for certain things because it can be textured and it's really fast. And there's some cool hacks that we can do with the emissive material, but don't think of the emissive material as one of our advanced light types. It's not going to give you the same quality that the area light, point light, or IES profiles would. But yeah, so that's why I don't include the emissive material in our breakdown there. Here you can see that here's another use case from a previous webinar of the emissive material with a color gradient on it. So if I need to see the light sources being visible, then I may use the emissive material. Like here we can see those little glowing things, and they each have a procedural gradient on top to give them the appearance. But again, I don't use them as a light source. That's not the best way to use your emissive materials. Use your advanced light types instead. So yeah, one question that we get every once in a while, why am I getting those white dots? First, use lumens or lux instead of watts. I know we're probably getting questioned, well, then why the heck are you keeping watts in there? That's a very good question, and we're going to have to address actually including those watts in there or not in future releases. But yeah, a lot of times it's going to come down to the watts. The intensity that you use with watts is just too much. Those little white hotspots are going to be less visible if you use lumens. Also, use interior mode when you start getting those white hotspots. Don't rely on indirect bounces. For those of you who are hoping to get these kind of high quality results out of KeyShot 5 or even 4, KeyShot 6 has been out for a year and it's got interior mode, and it's meant for doing these types of images. So if you're getting little white hotspots, use interior mode in KeyShot 6. You can also increase material or render samples. So if on the left-hand side, we've got a paint and we've increased the material samples from 9 to 16. That'll help with the material quality. Or you can always render with a higher sample value. That little slider doesn't really stop. You can always type in 512 or 1000 or 2000, and that's not insane depending on the scene that you're working with. You can always render at higher samples. So let's get into some tips for interiors, and then we're going to go ahead and hop into our scene. And I'll try to make sure I talk quicker because we want to be done with this in about 35 minutes to keep ourselves on track. First, whenever you're modeling and you're planning on working with lights in KeyShot, use real sizes in units. If you're working with just kind of mesh and polygons, then make sure you're actually defining units for things. So here's a really quick screen grab of that SketchUp file that we're going to go into. Everything has been modeled with real units. This is especially important when you start talking about light, because our light is following accurate fall off and power and, again, units and things like that. So making sure that you have real units and you're modeling in real units is really important. When you import your scene, just to double check, you can always select a piece of geometry, and on the right hand side you can see that group, that countertop part, is 107 by 2 by 42 inches. That sounds about right for that piece of geometry. Up under the edit in the top left, that's where you can choose your scene units after you've imported a model. If you import something like an OBJ that doesn't have units assigned, then make sure you set the units that make sense for that piece of geometry. Or if you've imported a model, let's say not directly, if you're working with a plugin, something I always do is just double check those units just to make sure they're correct for that piece of geometry. Okay, another thing that will also help with interiors, use multiple light sources. In this scenario, we've got a bunch. This one actually probably has too many. But that helps with the realism, because just like in real life, you've got light coming from the window, from the ceiling, from your desk lamp, and that's going to help with the realism. And here is side by side. It's actually, well, it's up and down, but here's a comparison of rendering a scene just using the emissive material and just using the area light. So only physical lights, no environment, nothing like that. The top half is emissive, and you can see how splotchy it is. Everything in the scene otherwise was the same: material, samples, render settings, but one is working with the emissive. Up top, it's splotchy and bright and kind of funky. On the bottom, that's our area light. So kind of a comparable amount of light put for each, but the area light is going to give us much, much more consistent, realistic lighting. So yeah, that's one thing. Don't use emissive, use the advanced light types. This is another kind of tip for working with interiors, and this is specific to KeyShot. I don't know how anybody else is doing it, but in KeyShot, fully enclose your scene. So that means if you're used to a workflow of hiding the walls and the ceiling to get the best results, don't do that, right? We want to make sure that we have a fully enclosed scene. So sorry for the big X, but it's a really common thing that doesn't give you the best results. A fully enclosed scene is really going to take advantage of that interior lighting algorithm, and it will give you the best results. So make sure all the floors are there, the walls, right? We want to have geometry everywhere. Another kind of tip that I can give you for working with physical lights in your scenes: use simple geometry whenever you can. Instead of bringing in a cube and making it a light, use a plane. A cube has 6 sides, so light's shooting out in 6 directions. Additionally, every surface of that cube actually has an inside and an outside. So you could be looking at, even with a cube, light having to be calculated from 12 different directions. Instead of working with solid bodies, work with things like planes. So for example, here, this plane on the left-hand side is actually casting light in one direction, only on the front of the plane. And so that makes it more efficient, makes it faster. So use simple geometry whenever you can to use as physical lights. Right, and just kind of generally speaking, watch your color temperature whenever you're working with physical light. So depending on the color of the light will give you certain moods. You know, these warm lights, they're going to be more persistent with incandescent lighting, with candlelight, with the sunlight, things like that, as opposed to your cool lights, which are going to be more like LEDs or actual, the sky color. So that's something just to keep in mind. Don't work with neutral lights. Work with warm or cool lights, because that's a more realistic representation of the light anyway. And don't work with pure white with your materials. Pure white really doesn't exist in kind of real life. So usually I'll kind of cap my brightness for the material at like an 80, 82, maybe 85% gray, but usually, and this is some input that I got from Dries, but 82% gray seems to be a good max for your brightness of a material. So I usually don't go higher than that. That's also the same thing when you're working with products. If you go pure white, you can't add a highlight to it. So working with a very light gray instead of a white allows you to add highlights to it. So we'll see that in the scene itself. Another kind of suggestion, use a shift lens, right? Left-hand side, regular lens. Left-hand side, regular lens, right-hand side, shift lens. It's a different lens type that we added in KeyShot 6. It gives you essentially 2-point perspective. We have a blog post on the shift lens if we aren't able to get to it in the hands-on demo. But that's going to give you a more realistic, well, not necessarily a more realistic appearance, but this is something that's highly desirable with architectural and interior renderings. Use interior mode. It's a no-brainer. For KeyShot 6, this is a lighting algorithm that's built for doing interiors. It's optimized for, as you can see there, complex lighting scenarios based off of a lot of indirect lighting. So there's a pre-made interior preset, and we'll probably tweak that by adding more ray bounces and increasing the shadow quality. But yeah, definitely don't try to, or use the interior mode if you're doing interiors. If you're using a previous version of KeyShot, the only thing I can tell you is that you're just going to have to wait a lot longer, and the results generally won't be as good as working with KeyShot 6 in the interior mode. We'll have some we've got some resources on our website as well, keyshot.com/scenes. There's actually 2 bathrooms, and now we're going to add a kitchen. So after this is wrapped up, we'll upload our files onto our share site, but that way you can actually download those scenes. So that's kind of it from an overview standpoint. So we talked about the different light types and some recommendations on working with those lights. So let's go ahead and actually hop into SketchUp and KeyShot. And just as a note, I can see lots of questions are coming in, which is awesome. We'll have kind of an open Q&A session after we're all wrapped up, but otherwise I'll go ahead and I'll hop into my SketchUp scene here, and we'll talk about the setup a little bit. So this is, it's a kitchen, and what we have are a few things. So let me hide some of these things really quick. First, I'm just gonna hide the walls. So now you should be able to see into the kitchen itself. There are a few things that are set up a little bit differently, especially when you start working with interiors. First is on the outside, let's say I don't have the perfect HDRI to give me the lighting or the view I want out of my window. So what I can do here, and it's these kind of green circular planes that are outside the windows, I plan for that, and I can actually throw an image on these. And that's just kind of I don't know if it's a hack or what, but I picked it up a long time ago looking at some other interior renderers. But that allows us to place any image we want outside the window. Also, I've got, just in case I'm not getting enough light from my HDRI, I've got these big planes on the outside, and we will assign light materials to those planes so that we can get kind of a brighter light. So again, we're not necessarily focusing on the environment lighting because can be kind of hit and miss. I tend to prioritize the physical lights, but we will show you where the environment is perfect, like for getting that bright sun that's coming in through the window. Let's open up, let me see if I can zoom in here. And get inside the kitchen. All right, cool. So now we're inside. What I've done is I've isolated all my lights on a separate layer or a separate group. And no worries if you're not a SketchUp person. I really like using it for things like interiors. It's really fast and lightweight. But what I've done is I've planned for all of my lights, and I just painted them green just so there was some commonality. But if I bring everything back, you can see that I've got a light in the hood. I've got some lights set up under the balcony, or excuse me, not the balcony, this kind of like drop down ceiling. So that's where our IES profiles are going to go. I've got some lights under the shelves. I've also got a light kind of in that back room just to give us a little bit more ambient lighting. There's a light on this kind of hanging pendant light above our kitchen table. So all the lights have already been broken out as separate pieces of geometry. They're all simple planes, again, except for this one above here. That's just because I wanted it to be a little bit different. But most of them are generally going to be simple planes that we add lights to just to keep it nice and fast and efficient. So from a setup, that's one thing that was done to help make it a little bit easier. Another thing that was done, and this is just because, was I planned a couple of these cubes to sit in my scene to help out with camera positioning. But yeah, so this is what my SketchUp scene looks like. It's pretty much all good to go. I've already imported it into KeyShot, so I'll go ahead and toggle over to KeyShot, and I've already applied materials here in this scene that we'll be working with just to make this a little bit faster. I'm going to go ahead and as far as scene setup goes, I imported it directly. I applied a bunch of materials. So here you can see I'm just in product mode. Normally it would just be in basic mode, and there's really nothing to it from a material standpoint yet as far as lights go. So what I'll do here, a couple of things to kind of consider. First of all, whenever I work with interiors, I will generally adjust my perspective, and I'll back it down to a lower value, something like 24, so that it gives me a wider field of view, especially if I'm inside of a small interior. Also relating to the cameras, camera management is going to be really important how I'm looking at my scene. So those kitchen views were those little cubes that I set up, and those are already placed inside my scene. And what I can do if I ever want to focus the camera in one particular place, like for example, I want to focus the camera on my island right here, I can right click on that piece of geometry, and when I hit look at, my camera is going to snap to looking at that little cube placeholder. And I'll throw this in performance mode up at the top left so that we can see it a little bit quicker. But yeah, so that's kind of a new thing that I've started doing, but that definitely helps being able to quickly set my camera in some place that I want. And for those pieces of geometry, I could right click on them and I can hit hide and lock. So now I don't ever see the piece of geometry, but when I zoom in, I'm actually looking at that piece of geometry that's essentially no longer visible, but that does help from a camera positioning standpoint. If I want to jump this over to, let's say, the right hand side, I could right click on it and then I hit look at, and then now I'm looking at that piece of geometry. Since it's hidden, all I see is whatever is behind it. So that's kind of a trick I use for helping navigate in our scene. So let's talk about the lights. We've got, and sorry for the crazy zooming, we've got a layer just for our lights, and those are these here. So let's go through first our kind of our emissive material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide the kitchen itself and then just focus in on these lights, and I'll zoom in on my what would be a TV. If I make the kitchen visible, you'll see that that has already been set up. I'll hide this plane. That's an additional plane to give us a little bit of a glow. But what we'll do is we'll focus in here. I've got a TV, and that TV has glass applied to it in the beginning. So let's say we actually want to make that a light emitting material. Well, I can double click on the TV panel, and I can add a texture to it, and I already have a texture good to go that's been made for this one. So it's the TV screen, so I'll just select that, and we'll change this to a planar projection type instead of box mapping. It looks like it needs to be rotated 90 degrees. I'm going to zip through this stuff because it's more relevant. If you want to know more about texture, positioning, things like that, take a look at our last webinar. That was all about it. Right, but now I have a color texture loaded on that piece of geometry, and to make it a light emitting material, I'm going to use the drop down right here, and I'm just going to make it emissive. That is now a basic light emitting material. If we get it out of performance mode, and you can see I'm on the inside of this kitchen, it's super dark because everything is opaque right now, but that light is shining. And if I show my glass as well, I should see. And we probably aren't going to see much, but I should see some reflections on the glass there. But yeah, so emissive material, perfect for this use case. I have a TV, I need to make it look like a TV, and it's got to glow. Excellent. Now I have that set to emissive, and we're good. So we'll use that same technique for the view outside the window. So the same thing here. If I double click on this material, because what I'm doing is I'm planning for my view, and this is kind of an extra step, but it is a good one. So if I have my view outside the window, I'm going to use again a diffuse texture or a color texture, and this is an awesome image that I got from unsplash.com. So this is just some view, and I've never been to New Zealand, but I guess this is what Auckland looks like. And so we can use that to actually just have a simple view, and we can always change the position of that, maybe scale it up or down, whatever we need to. I'm just kind of eyeballing right here. But now we've got a view outside of our window, and we're not going to rely on our environment because that can be really tough. This is a lot easier to just put a piece of geometry out there, slap an image on it, and then have it set as our view outside the window. So same trick here that we did, or it's not really a trick, but I can change that material from diffuse to emissive under special. Again, it's not under light sources. It shouldn't be used as a light source. It's used as a special material. So I can set that to emissive. And under the advanced drop down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncheck visible in shadows, because this material does allow us to make it so that you can see it, but it doesn't cast shadows. Take a look at my green part right there. If I uncheck visible in shadows, that means light shines straight through it without showing up in shadows. So really important checkbox if you're doing this kind of technique like I'm doing here. That means that if I look out the window sees this plane, and it doesn't cast shadow. So really important little thing right there. But yeah, so there we go. We've applied kind of our view outside the window. I'll go ahead and turn that off so it doesn't distract us too much. Same thing for this one right here, hide that one. And now let's take a look at getting into our physical lights. So We're gonna zoom in on the inside of our model, and everything is dark, so I'll put it in performance mode, which lets us see in here, and I'll try to zoom in on one of my materials. Mouse is a little extra sensitive. I'm not entirely sure why. But okay, so anything that's green means it's got to have a light material added to it. So I'm going to open up my library. I'm going to go over to my lights, and I'm going to select an area light. And again, we'll ignore anything that says watts. We're just going to stay clear of those. And we're going to say that this is going to be a warm light. So I can take this area light, 6,000 lumen, which is still really bright, and I'll apply it onto my piece of geometry. And we're going to get it out of performance mode. And so you can see here, now that single piece of geometry is casting a lot of light into our scene. One thing to take note of here is that if I go to my lighting tab, I'm in my basic setting. So this is just using kind of the standard presets. If I set it on product, I'm going to start to see more light, but I'm going to see those dreaded spots, right? And this is where KeyShot 6 does a much better job, because all I need to do is check the interior checkbox, and that enables interior mode. And this is going to give us a higher quality image. And if you notice, almost in the same amount of time, we got some spots, but they're going to disappear. And they're going to be constantly being squished by our noise suppression algorithms, right? But now we have our light shining down, right? And it's providing the light in the scene, or most of it. So that material is an area light. I might drop that down and make it a little less bright if it's just kind of the light for the hood. I don't necessarily need it to be as bright. And you'll notice, since this was a plane, or a simple planar piece of geometry, hopefully I got my normals right out of SketchUp. I did. I can uncheck back of geometry. So now the bottom of the plane is shooting light out. The top is not. If I turn off both, I don't get any light. So now apply to front of geometry. The front, which I've defined as the bottom, is emitting light, and I've just made that light take 50% less time, because it's only shooting light in one direction. So area light's there, so we're good to go. And I would probably rename it. I'd call it light, and let's just call it hood. So we'll keep that as kind of a warm light, and the light power itself looks all right. So let's talk about some of our other lights. Again, I'll hop into performance mode, and I can jump back here. And you can see here, I've planned for a few different lights in kind of my shelves, my mood lighting up there. So if I double click on any of these, I can modify them, right? And I can either drag the light from the library over, or what I tend to do a lot is I just use my drop down. I'll change this to an area light diffuse. Again, it defaults to watt. I'll change that to lumen instead. Or I can also use lux, which is lumen per square meter. So let's get out of performance mode to see what our light values look like. So 100 lumen, let's say we're going to do about 500 lumen. So that's going to be a little bit brighter, maybe too bright. Also, I'll use my Kelvin values to try to get some color temperature in there again, so we're not working with pure white, or excuse me, neutral light values. This is going to be more realistic. So here, if I have that light on those materials, and I can right click, I can copy that light material, and I can right click and I can paste a linked material onto this part down here at the bottom. Right, so what's going to happen here is, because I'm defining the light with lumen, is that since they're different size piece of geometry, the light power is going to be distributed over more surface area, aka it becomes less consistent with the lighting. So let's make sure it's just applied to the front, right? And you can see these are nice and bright, whereas this light down here on the bottom is dimmer. And that's because, since it's a bigger piece of geometry, it's taking those 500 lumen and it's distributing it over a larger surface area. So if I want these to be the same light intensity, what I can do is I can use my drop down, change that to lux. And I'd have to do some math to find out some of the values there, or I can just try typing in a bigger value. So now we've got 5,000 lux, so that's 5,000 lumen per square meter. These guys are probably definitely less than a square meter. But now the light output between those two, or actually in this case 7 similarly sized pieces, 7 differently sized pieces of geometry, the light output is going to be consistent on all those different parts. So this is where we would use lux instead of lumen. So I'll just give this a name. I'll call this light, and let's say these are accent lights. Right, so we've got our accent lights there, and we can see that chugging away. Okay, so what other area lights do we have? I'll go into performance mode just so this goes a little bit quicker. We've got a little over 10 minutes to get through some more content here. And so let's say we have our lights up above that kind of, it's not necessarily a drop ceiling, but it's some kind of ceiling, right? So here, I'll use another area light, and I'll get let's say we want this to be a cooler light. So I'll get this 6000 lumen cool, and I'll drag it onto that light there. Let's get out of performance mode so we can see the result. And now you can see I've got this really nice cool light that's pushing kind of light up into the ceiling. And I can change the lumen output on that. It probably wouldn't be that bright per se. Let's drop it down a little bit. But this is kind of subjective. If I really, if I was actually doing an interior and I knew the lights that I would be specifying, I would drop those in or reference the actual lumen or lux values, turn off back of geometry so it's just pushing the light up instead of down as well. And this is just kind of a good time to mention that you can disable things like visible to camera. So I can make that invisible light source. So if my camera does come high up, I don't know where the light's coming from. I can't actually see it, but there is light now being cast. And that's because this is my my invisible area light. And I'll just call it, let's say that's a mood light up there. So let's move our camera back down so we can see kind of the result of what we're getting. But now we're getting a bunch of different lights, and we still need more light in here. And of course I would probably go in and tweak some of those light values. I think my lamp is getting in the way. I'm just actually going to hide the lamp for now. But now we can see a result of our lights that we've added again. And so far this has been pretty quick, just dropping those in. It's still pretty dark. This would be great for a nighttime rendering, but we need more. So let's talk about another one of our light types, which is going to be the IES profile, those intelligent kind of light profiles. So I've got a group already set up for my lighting profiles, and these are these spots, right? So these are these lights that we can see right here. I'll throw this in performance mode, so it's a little bit quicker. But you can also see, before we get into the spots, you can see that I have that placeholder geometry. I mentioned it briefly, but I just have a chunk of material in there. It looks like a marshmallow, and that's just set to be a flat white. I could set that to be emissive and put a color gradient on it or something like that. If I get out of performance mode, you'll see that flat, the material type flat, right, under basic is just color, no shadows, no lighting, no reflections, nothing, just the color white. So I want to see something in the kind of can there. So instead, I'll just set that to flat, and then I'm going to apply the light to my IES profile. So what we'll do here is that material should automatically be linked. So let me deselect it. What I can do is I can just go to my lights folder. I can go to the IES lights, and I can take a look at my modular lighting instruments. Again, if you don't see these IES profiles, make sure that you have the full install of 6.2 on your machine, not just the update. But here you can see the previews of all these different lights, and I can start going through these, and I can try to find some light that works for me. So let's just grab one of these and see what it looks like. So let's do the single square LED. And the easiest way, my save reminder just popped up. I'll live on the edge for now. Actually, no, I'm going to play it super extra safe, and I'm going to save my file. There we go. So let's go ahead and throw an IES profile on it. Easiest way to apply those IES profiles is to find that material, find that part in your scene tree, and instead of dragging it directly into your real-time view, I can just drag it directly onto the piece of geometry itself. So now what happens here is you can see that I have this new piece of geometry. This is the visualization of my IES profile. Let's get out of performance mode and see what that looks like. Right now I'm getting this directional light in my scene, which is awesome. It is definitely it's pointing in the wrong direction though. And this is where IES Profiles, it's something to consider. You need to keep in mind that IES Profile, since there's a direction built in, it may not necessarily match to your modeling software or your intended origin. KeyShot is Y up, so if this wasn't actually created with Y up, then it's pointing out in some other direction. So I'll throw it in performance mode. Again, just speeds that up a little bit. And what I can do here is I'm going to rotate all of those, but first I'm also just going to make sure that I've got that same material applied to all these other parts. So I can right click and I can copy this material and I can select the other parts, and I should be able to paste a linked material. There we go. So now you can see that, again, I'm doing this in my scene tree. I'm not relying on my real-time view, but now I'm pasting a linked material. So now you can see I have a bunch of these IES profiles. So I've got 4. So what about my other 2 rows, the middle and the rear? I can right click, go to material, and I can paste the linked material. And so now I have one IES profile that's defining all of those lights in the scene. If you've got KeyShot Pro, okay, so here you can see I'm having a little bit of a funky time moving them. This is a good time to mention the geometry view, which we can get to just by hitting this icon up here for those of you that have geometry view with KeyShot Pro, right? But that's going to open up this new tab. And that's going to give me kind of a stripped down, non-rendered sort of OpenGL version of my view. And it's got a lot of geometry in the scene. It's just loading it for the first time. So let's give it a sec. But the geometry view is going to be a little bit more efficient way to move your geometry or look at your scene. All right, so let me open that up as a second window. For those of you who this is totally new for, the geometry view is really, really helpful because it's a great way of looking at your scene, and we can move stuff around. So for example here, I can select my lights, my set of rear lights, and I can right click and I can move that selection. And now you can see it in the real-time view. Whoop, it keeps on docking. I actually don't want to dock it. But now you can see that if I rotate these lights and I hold down shift, you can see that they're now pointing in the right direction. So those are now pointing down. I'm going to expand this window a little bit, hit the little green checkbox. I'll select the middle, right click, move selection. And you don't need the geometry view to move this stuff, but it certainly does help. So I'm holding down shift, and then let's point those lights down, and then I'll select that last group, the front. Right, and I'll move that selection, rotate it so those lights are pointing down. So just a little bit faster way to move those around. So now if I navigate inside my model, you can see that those IES profiles are all pointing down. Get it out of performance mode, and I should see a big blast of super warm light, right? But those IES profiles already have the intensity and the color baked in. However, I can still select any one of those materials, hit the edit material button, and that's my single square LED, some definition direct from modular lighting instruments. In this case, this one's a little bit too warm for my liking, so I'll probably desaturate it just a little bit, just so it's not as warm. But now I've got these lights that are coming in through IES profiles, and I have a single IES profile determining the shape, the brightness of all of those lights. And again, that's a linked material. So I'll go back to my material tab, and that name is actually pretty good. I'll keep the standard. I'll just add light onto the beginning so I can find it later. So we're looking pretty good here. The last thing that we're missing is we're missing kind of our bright lights. Also, this outline that you see here, the orange outline, you can disable that. It'll never show up in a rendering, but if you hit the L key, L for lights, it'll disable that. So I'll throw it in a performance mode. The last thing that we need here is our nice bright light coming in through our window. And the request that we get is you want this like really cool light. It's not coming from the sun, it's coming essentially from the sky and kind of diffused light. So we plan for this by just creating these big light planes outside our window, slightly offset and slightly larger than the window itself. So what I'll do here is I'm just going to zoom my camera in on that little placeholder I had above the table. So I think it's table here. I'll right click and hit look at, and let's zoom in so that we can see these windows. All right, so now we can see what's actually happening. Let's get out of performance mode. We still have our material. The last material I edited was those lights. Right now you can see it's diffuse. So watch what's going to happen here if I, zoomed out too much. Sorry about that. I got to invert my scroll wheel. But if I hit the material type, I can change that to my area light. Again, not emissive, area light. But now if I change that to an area light, and let's change the output to, let's say in this case, lux, because we want consistent light between both of those panels. And let's make the color some nice cool color, and let's start bumping up the brightness. In this case, I don't actually have a unit for like daytime lux value, but let's just say it's something, let's try 5,000. There we go. All right, so now we've got this nice bright light coming in through our window, and it's relatively cool. My walls here, if I double click on those, they're a diffuse light, again, 80% gray, so it's not a pure white. But now my lights coming in through the window are going to be really cool, and you can definitely see that effect that they're giving that nice cool lighting. So I'll modify my window light. Let's just call this light window, since they're linked, and I can turn off, let's see if I set this up correctly. Yep, I'm turning off the back. So now if I were to zoom out and swing the camera around, not that much, oh man. I'm all sorts of mess with my zooming today, but you'll see the outsides are dark and I'm only casting light in on the inside. I could also turn off visible to camera, right? So now I can't see that. I also don't want the reflection of those invisible lights. I can make that invisible. And one really important thing is I can disable visible in shadows. So now the light that is coming in from my environment comes in on top of all the other light. So let's zoom in here, right? And let's get ourselves back out of performance mode, right? And now we have our nice cool light coming in from, in this case, our studio environment, which wouldn't be realistic. But if I were to set this to, where are my views? Here we go. There's my, these are going to be our lighting panels, those emissive lighting panels that we have on the outside that are invisible. They've got a texture to them. Excuse me, they're visible, but they let light through, right? And now I have my super cool light mixed in with my other physical lights in this scene. So if I go into performance mode and let's try to get a nice wide angle view, something like this, get it out of performance mode. Let's see what it looks like with interior mode. Now we have, now we've got everything, right? Pretty much almost everything, but we've got light coming in through the window. We've got some physical lights. We have a mix of cool and warm lighting, and that's all set up right now through our physical lights. Last thing, and I know I'm going over and I apologize for that, but I want to bring in a light, or I want to add really sharp lights coming in from the sun, right? And we can use environments from the environment library, some of these outdoor environments, and I can, just drag one of these over. This one I know has a big strong light in it, this forest road environment. And what I can do is rotate my environment. It's a little bit tough to see right here, so let's throw this in performance mode. This is where my light's coming from. If I get it out of performance mode, you should see some cast shadows. Oh, I disabled my ground shadows. All right, but now our light from the environment's coming from the right-hand side. So let's zoom in and let's see what this looks like. Right, so let's get, there we go. Now we have our environment actually casting that extra bright, sharp light. So this is now working with a combination of environment lighting and physical lighting. If you have KeyShot Pro, this is an awesome time to point out the sun and sky generator, because the sun and sky will allow you to recreate daylight from any place on the planet, any time of day and year. So I already built one, so let's see what this looks like. Let's grab, I think it is Boston in August. right? So I've pre-generated this one so I can throw it in, and let's see what direction that light is coming from. I'm not entirely sure what it will be, but that's going to give us a really nice sharp sun, so that we get these really nice sharp shadows coming in from all the stuff on our window. There we go. So now I'll throw it in performance mode just so I can navigate a little bit faster and rotate this around. In this case, I actually can't see it in performance mode, so let's just do that manually. There we go. So now let's rotate it a little bit more. And now we have our light streaming in through the window with a combination of all our other lights. And this is just a really nice brief time to mention. Under camera, you can see here, I have some vertical convergence. So instead of working with a regular perspective camera, I'm gonna change that to a shift lens, hit the estimate vertical shift button, and that's gonna do its magic to give me 2-point perspective. And this last light, I'm just gonna hide because we didn't worry about it this time around. So yeah, that's about it. My apologies for going over, but that's kind of an overview of the physical lights and how to work with them inside of KeyShot.